Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cameron. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on today this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we will be discussing the Green Lawn Cemetery in East Longmeadow. So tell us about the early history of the Green Lawn Cemetery.
Some of the very old gravestones. Now, this is a cemetery that's cut in sections by a major public road. So the old part is very obvious from the newer part, even though the new part has a beautiful old gate to it. All right, and we'll talk about that arrangement and the gates and the fence and the separations between the two and how the gravestones are positioned, so forth. Now, the history of the cemetery is such that it probably started in 1828. It was at first called the Center Cemetery. It's somewhat near the center of East Longmeadow. Probably Green Lawn is a better name for it because it's not truly near the center. To find it, it's at the corner of Callender Avenue and Pleasant Street. Now, the first burial is Franklin Ashley, most likely. There are three earlier burials than that in 1828. They were earlier than that year, but they are just cenotaphs. And so they have their names inscribed on a memorial stone. They're not truly buried here. Now, this cemetery is on a national register because it's nicely made, and someone in East Longmeadow was nice enough to put it up for consideration. And the gravestones are positioned such that it's kept mostly its old original arrangement. But what it doesn't have are the footstones anymore. For the most part, those are quite long gone. And that's terrible. But at least it has, of course, the tablet headstones.
And tell us how the oldest gravestones are arranged.
All right, from 1828 to about 1860, in this cemetery, you should have the vertical headstones positioned so the inscription is pointing toward the west. And it does. So every old stone before 1860 is pointing towards the west. If it had this footstone, and they had them originally, but they're gone, those would have been about 6.5 feet away, and they would have been smaller. They would have been the same composition as the headstone, and they would have faced towards the east. And so the body would have nothing face in towards it. And these were positioned so that people could see, as they walked through the rows, they could see the deceased names. And they would have looked for their deceased family member from either looking towards that big headstone, which was out from the body, or positioned outwards on the other side towards the other walkway. So every burial is surrounded by these two walkways. One towards the headstone area, going north to south, and the other one towards the footstone area, also going north to south. And it would have been 2.5 feet wide or so. So this is a way you could find the deceased member's burial location without ever cross over their gravestone and trying to figure out where it was. So it worked. And the sexton, a person that ran the churchyard and the old burial grounds, would have made sure these positions were kept up. Now, during the beautification movement from around 1880 to 1910, throughout the United States, a lot of footstones were thrown out. a lot of headstones were repositioned so they face towards the road or face in the direction that the modern gravestones were positioned. All right. If you go into the modern part of this cemetery, the gravestones do not face east or west. They face another direction. That tradition went away pretty much in 1860. And so, in this cemetery, the vast majority of the headstones are pointing towards the west. Great. Now, there's one row which doesn't have that property. And that row is the row that is the oldest row. And the stones used to face towards the west, but when they put in a stone mortar wall around most of the old portion of the cemetery, the gravestones in that first row were positioned to face directly into the wall. And so most of those gravestones have been turned around 180 degrees to face towards the east, except 4 of them still point towards the west, but right into the wall. So, at least in this grave cemetery, most of the stones that are old point in the correct direction.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, tell us about the gates and fence.
Now, the more modern section across the street has a large pedestrian gateway. And this was given up, money for it, by the wife of James Rankin. So the gate is dedicated to him and it has his name on there. He is buried in this more modern section. His wife, Louisa Schneider, at some point donated the money, and it's a beautiful gate and a beautiful wall. That wall continues on the other side. His gravestone with his wife is up the rightmost entryway roadway, about 100 feet in, has Rankin on the front of it, and then the rest, James Rankin and Louisa, on the back. So it'd be nice to pay homage to his gravestone, just because he had such a great pedestrian gateway devoted to him. All right, now there's a nice fence around the old part, a white fence, kind of looks like a picket fence, but it's mostly made out of metal. And around the modern part, there's a beautiful stone masonry fence. And so the old part got the average fence, the new part got a superb fence and nice pedestrian gateway.
And why the separation between the two portions of the cemetery?
So, this separation between the two portions is instructive because it leads one to see how the pre-1870 gravestones were positioned on an east-west axis and where the inscriptions would have been for the footstones and headstones relative to the body and where the walkways would have been, because it keeps most of its old characters with only the footstones being thrown out. So it's instructive. Most graveyards and cemeteries in the old area, the modern is mixed in with it enough that it loses some of their properties and features. And here, it has not lost too many of them. Also, the position is changed. Most stones are changed, no matter where the body is, to be pointed towards the modern roadway. And that didn't happen here either. And so it's a very instructive cemetery, except for those footstones.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in as well. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website, and as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you, and hope you join us again.